Hey guys, what is up? Steven here doing another video for you guys. Really doing a follow-up video from something that Tyler actually did last week, which was his composite rankings for free agency. So he did running backs, tight ends, and wide receivers, and this is something that we're going to be doing for other positions as well, particularly in this video. I'm going to be going over offensive tackles, offensive guards, and interior defensive linemen. I'm going to do a separate video for edge rushers and linebackers. And then Tyler's going to do another video for members of the secondary. So that would be safeties and corners. Seemed like we got some very positive feedback from his video about running backs, wide receivers, and tight ends. So we wanted to keep doing that. And it's a very similar formula for this video. Essentially, I had specific categories for these players for pending free agents. Of course, a lot of the statuses of these players can change. Certain players can be re-signed even before they hit free agency and stuff like that. So I also have players highlighted in colors as Tyler did as well. So anyone that's highlighted in green is 27 or younger. Anyone that is red is 32 or older. And then anyone that's yellow is everything in between 28 to 31. So yeah, it's going to be a fun video. Let's dive right in. That being said. So Tyler had a fancy schmancy PowerPoint. I'm not going to be doing that. I'm just going to share my screen here and go over this particular thing. So the other thing that I wanted to point out, I do have this at a snap filter. There's simply too many players, particularly among defensive line and edge rushers, to not have a snap filter. So for the offensive lineman, I did minimum of 20% snaps. For defensive linemen, I did 25 because they're even that much more on that side of the ball. So that being said, offensive tackle up first. As you can see, my four categories here are total pressures. That is among all offensive linemen in the 20% snap threshold. And then obviously these are the free agents. So for example, among all offensive linemen who have hit that, who did hit that 20% threshold, Dennis Kelly allowed the fewest pressures. He also had very few snaps because he only started 4 games, but that is what it is. That's Tyler's guy. I know he's a big fan of him. So I have total pressures, pass blocking efficiency rating, which is a rating that Pro Football Focus does to kind of calculate really kind of the frequency in which you have reps versus pressures allowed. So the lower or the higher the ranking there, the better. Obviously, you want close to 99, which is what Rashawn Slater was. Then I have run blocking grade. Again, offensive line is still very subjective, especially run blocking grade from Pro Football Focus, but we work with what we have. I needed another category, and that's the one that I did. And then for the players that I could find through Pro Football Focus or Spot Rack or Over the Cap, I did look at kind of their expected market. Obviously, they don't have every player, but again, did what you can and work with what you have. So as you guys can see, Chukwuma Okafor from the Pittsburgh Steelers comes atop this list, which is rather surprising, just based off of what you think of the Pittsburgh offensive line this year. So he was 42nd. He had the 42nd most pressures allowed, or 42nd fewest, however you want to look at that. But his pass blocking efficiency rating was fantastic and obviously played a ton of snaps. So he's a very young player, stayed healthy. And I think his pass blocking efficiency rating kind of shows there potentially is some upside there. So again, he came in atop this ranking, but frankly, I'd be pretty surprised if the Steelers let him walk. I know that they have Zach Banner there as well. But Banner to me would be more of a cut candidate than letting Chukwuma Okorafor, hit free agency. I forgot to mention earlier, those who have an asterisk next to their name are primarily right tackle candidates. Of course, you have Riley Reif, Trent Brown, Jason Peters, Cam Fleming, Dennis Kelly, Jermaine Ifedi, Dwayne Brown, Brandon Shell, and Jerron Christian, rounding out the top 10. So in terms of the right tackle position here, I'm obviously not super interested in players like Jason Peters or Dwayne Brown or Bobby Massey, Nate Solder, those older players who are either left tackles only or really, really bad. I think we all saw how bad Nate Solder is a couple weeks ago when Joey Bosa really kind of took it to him. So this is just a really interesting way to look at things. Again, this is definitely not definitive. Chukwuma Okorafor is definitely not better than a Dwayne Brown, than a Jason Peters. But again, you work with what you have, and I think it's interesting to look at it this way. In terms of the Chargers, I don't think you have like a legitimate starting option here. I tweeted out about Morgan Moses a few weeks ago before really diving into this, that there is a coaching connection there with Shane Day, who was an assistant offensive line coach when Morgan Moses was drafted by the Washington football team. But he was 83rd in total pressures allowed, and that was kind of a mess. It was really the worst output of his career. So maybe you can kind of talk yourself into that working. He played a lot of snaps for them, 22nd most among all offensive tackles. He was 26 in run blocking grade. And there is a lot of scheme familiarity there from his days with the Kyle Shanahan system, both in Washington and in New York. So, sometimes there's coach familiarity, scheme familiarity, and that equals free agency signing. Pro Football Focus has him at 3 years, $7.5 million per. I wouldn't necessarily hate it, but I feel like I've made my stance clear. I feel like the best possible path forward at the right tackle position is through the draft. What I will say is that I am in favor of signing a veteran, or at least someone who is an experienced swing tackle, like a Cam Fleming, like a Dennis Kelly, who have connections to this coaching staff, who have scheme familiarity. And maybe you kind of bridge that gap. Maybe you take a second round tackle as opposed to a first round tackle, and bring in that veteran for, at the very least, a high level competition, right? Like, I think that really needs to be the theme of this Chargers offseason, is competition, because frankly, this past season wasn't good enough. I feel like there was too many positions across the board kind of handed to players. And obviously, Joey Bosa, Derwin James, Rashawn Slater, you don't need competition for those guys. But Tom Telesco did say that they will be adding, or should be adding, improving the offensive line. They're not going to look at it and say, yeah, this is good. Obviously, Brian Bulaga is a cut candidate. I'd be pretty surprised if it wasn't at this point. So that's where I'm at personally. I think you can kind of look at this list, and really there isn't, like I said, there isn't a clear-cut upgrade, a long-term upgrade at right tackle. There's no Corey Linsley in this class. There's no Matt Filer in this right tackle class. I think your best bet is to sign a veteran, equivalent Ode Abushi, if you will, and then draft second round, third round tackle. I personally would draft a first round tackle. That's just me. I think that's where you get the best value, best bang for your buck in terms of offensive tackles. But that's where I'm at. So moving on to interior offensive linemen, I didn't really include centers. Obviously the Chargers have a decision to make with Scott Quessenberry. I feel like that's pretty cut and dry. They have obviously the experience there. The relationships are there. So I feel like I would re-sign him. I feel like he would be pretty cheap, like super cheap. He hasn't really played meaningful snaps in 2 or 3 years. So in terms of center, it is what it is. Like, I think as long as you have a quality backup there behind Corey Linsley, that's enough. And I think Scott Quessenberry fits that bill. In terms of guard, I'd be pretty surprised if Ode Abushi were not back, and he did come in at 4th on this list, and would be significantly higher if not for the snaps, right? Because he was 125th in snaps played, because he only played 4 games. But he has a great pass blocking efficiency. Across the first 4 weeks of the season, he was like 3rd or 4th in pressures allowed. Him and Matt Filer were fantastic. So I feel like it's pretty cut and dry there. You re-sign Ode Abushi. again, allow him to compete for that starting position with Brendan Hymus, who presumably is the guard of the future. And listen, O'Day's recovery gives Brendan Hymus a legitimate opportunity. You know, O'Day tore his ACL in November, right? Yeah, November. So he hopefully would be ready for like a training camp. So there's a little bit of a bind there. I certainly would not be opposed to drafting another interior offensive lineman in that Brendan Hymus range, 4th, 5th round, and really adding depth along that offensive line, because you are going to need, like I said, that maybe could be a center guard flex as opposed to re-signing Scott Quessenberry. I could certainly see that happening. But there is a chance that O'Day is not ready to start the season. So whether that's Brendan Hymus, whether that's another draft pick, I think you need to add some legitimate competition there. But O'Day makes the most sense. I think if they're looking for a longer term solution, they could certainly target a Connor Williams, who did come in at number 1 on this list. He's projected by PFF to have a 3 by 6.67 contract. I know most Cowboys fans are not expecting or hoping to see him back next year. But I think he's a fine offensive lineman. I think he just happens to be in a place where they expect every single offensive lineman to be elite Hall of Fame status when you're playing next to Tyron Smith and Zach Martin and Lyle Collins, who, by the way, could be a cut candidate by the Cowboys. And if he does get cut, that is an absolute no-brainer. Sign him immediately and pay him whatever he wants. But that's another conversation depending how that goes. So again, in terms of guard center, you don't have to do a whole lot here. Bring back Oday Abuji. You can bring back Michael Schofield. Like I said, you'll need another body in case Oday's not ready. So I wouldn't be opposed to that either, as long as Schofield is behind Brendan Hymus on the depth chart going forward, because that he should not be a starter next year. All right, the big one, obviously, interior defensive line is a very hot topic for the Chargers this year. You know, they have a bunch of free agents: Lavont Joseph, Justin Jones, and Christian Covington. So right now they have Jerry Tillery, Joe Gaziano, and Braden Fajoko under contract. But I feel like this team needs a remake along the defensive line. And I think you have to bring in multiple bodies for competition. I think you bring back Justin Jones at the right price. You'll see here, he did check in at 20th, sandwiched right in between Sebastian Joseph Day and Akeem Hicks. Really, the three of them, that's more about the amount of snaps played, especially Hicks and Joseph Day, who had the 29th most snaps and 30th among free agent defensive tackles. So this particular ranking is only among free agent tackles because there's so many. I felt like it was easier to do that way. So yeah, that's obviously the situation for the Chargers. I think you bring back Justin Jones. We saw today on that All In episode, you know, he was just so emotional, and I think this team loves him. So I think there is a world in which somebody kind of pays him a lot more than the Chargers are able to or willing. But I don't think he's going to cost a lot, frankly, on the open market, because he's been hurt every single year he's been in the NFL, which I feel like nobody's really talking about. And then you look at his production, and it really is kind of middle of the pack in terms of these free agents. So the categories, which I should have said earlier for this one, you have snap percentage among free agents again, total pressures, pass rush win rate, run stops, and then run stop percentage. So, you know, that's really the thing here with Justin Jones. Low snap percentage among free agents, and then kind of middle of the pack. Again, if this number were 13 in terms of snap percentage, then he would obviously be higher, because he is a very solid defensive tackle. I think because he was the Chargers' best defensive tackle, we kind of overrate a little bit his skill set. But he's a fine player. He certainly has value for this team. The team loves him. You know, he's got great leadership skills, and, you know, presumably the best is yet to come there. So I'm in favor of signing him, but I still think after that, you have to replace Lavont Joseph. He's higher on this list than I think I would have anticipated. You know, his pass rush numbers do him favors, right? Fourth in pass rush win rate, fifth in run stops, ninth in run stop percentage. So Linval had a good season, but he really tailed off, and that concerns me because he had COVID, he was injured, he's older. So that's just a little questionable to me to see if he could get back to what he was doing in the first 10 weeks. I'm not quite sure about that. So for me, because of Linval Joseph's age and his injury, COVID, I'm not sure how much longer he has. I'm moving on and I'm trying to get younger at that position. I'm not trying to draft a first round pick nose tackle. I know everybody wants Jordan Davis. I'm not about that life. I'm adding a nose tackle here in free agency. So for what it's worth, Linval Joseph by PFF is projected to only have a 1 year, $6.75 million contract. Again, it's pros and cons, right? Do you bring it back, run back the same group? Linval's mostly played in the 4-3 schemes. So I wouldn't be surprised if he retires, honestly. But I think he has some good ball left in a scheme that he is more familiar with than what the Chargers run. So that being said, I mentioned getting younger. I mentioned that's where I would rather spend my money. So I have said before, I'm a big fan of DJ Jones from the 49ers. It doesn't seem like he is going to be back there, but he's number one in the league in run stops and second in the league in run stop percentage. Again, by defensive tackles who hit that threshold. If you don't put a threshold, that's Braden Fehoko. If you kind of put it towards the back half of the season, that's also Braden Fehoko, number one. So big fans of Braden Fehoko, obviously, on this show. Big fan of DJ Jones as well. I think he's a solid pass rusher, but most importantly, he's a very disruptive run stuffing defensive tackle. And he's very young. He's only 27. I think he's about to turn 27 rather. And it doesn't seem like he's going to be back in San Francisco. So that to me is my number one target. But he hasn't really played in the 3-4. He's more of a 1 technique, 3 technique kind of player. So I like him. I know Gavino Borges from Chargers Wire really likes him, but we'll have to see how that one happens. Austin Johnson from the New York Giants is high on this list. He kind of tailed off a little bit once the Giants kind of tanked their season. But he is younger. He is a 3-4 nose tackled kind of player, and he's young. He's 27 years old, just turned 27, and he's very high on this list. Again, second in total run stops, only behind DJ Jones, 6th in run stop percentage. There's a little bit of pass rush there, not a ton. So he's a little lower to me than DJ Jones. DJ Jones projected at 3 years, $8.75 million. BJ Hill will not be opposed to signing him either. He's more of a 3 technique, 3-4-5 technique, a little bit more of a Justin Jones, Jerry Tillery type. Very disruptive player, as you can see across the board. Total pressures 4th among free agents, pass rush win rate 6, run stops 8, run stop percentage 5. Again, very similar contract projections to DJ Jones, but again, he's not a nose tackle. So this is kind of where I'm focusing in. Al Woods from the Seattle Seahawks. He's an older player, nose tackle. Again, not super interested in getting older. I want to get younger. So that's where Sebastian Joseph Day comes in. He was hurt this year, but even with the injuries, he still hit the minimum threshold of snaps, and he was first in run stop percentage, 9th in total run stops. I think he hasn't played since like week 8 or 9. But he's just a dominant run stuffing defensive tackle, nose tackle. There is scheme familiarity, obviously, being with the Rams over the last few seasons. There's coaching familiarity with Brandon Staley. So to me, this is kind of a no-brainer. It checks really every single box. He's young, he's productive, he's disruptive. He's familiar with the coaching staff. He's familiar with the scheme. He is a little pricey, according to PFF. I tweeted out or I quote tweeted earlier today an article by Deontay Lee, who had Sebastian Joseph Day in the top 4 in terms of defensive tackle free agents. And I would agree with that. He's incredibly disruptive, like I said. he does come at a little bit pricier tag for what it's worth. The Chargers were paying Linval Joseph $8.5 million over the last 2 years to play nose tackle. So 3 for 10, as long as you kind of incentivize that contract. And, the Chargers are great at that. I would not be opposed there if that's where that starts. You have Joseph Day, you have Braden Fehoko, who are back to back in run stop percentage if you don't put any snap threshold in terms of run stop percentage. So I would be a big fan of that. That's where I would start with the defensive line. After that, like I said, I think you could stand to add another body in there. Ideally, I want competition. Ideally, I want Jerry Tillery in a more specialist role as a pass rusher, because as long as he is in there and being a liability on the defensive line, in particular against the run, then you're always going to have that weak spot, and teams are always going to exploit that weak spot. So I think you need to kind of reduce his role at the very least down to like 50%, because he was still playing 80% of snaps when everybody on this defensive line was healthy. I think that's a problem. So this is where I think you could add a William Golston, who some scheme familiarity with Tampa Bay, 3-4-ish. I'd be surprised if they re-signed him. He's a little older, but he's also a pass rushing kind of player, 6th in total pressures, 9th in pass rush win rate, 15th in run stops, 21st in run stop percentage. So he's not an incredibly productive player, but he's an upgrade over Christian Covington. And I think he would at least provide competition, and legitimate competition, for Jerry Tillery / Justin Jones, and really kind of keep the defensive line fresh. So I would also consider drafting a defensive tackle at the very least to, again, provide competition. Not in the first round, probably not in the second round, more of the 3rd, 4th, 5th round kind of player to at least develop behind these guys. And again, like, I haven't really talked about Calais Campbell, who came in at number 1 on this list. If Calais wants to come west, he's never really, he played in Arizona for a really long time. Obviously, Baltimore has fired Wink Martindale. So if Calais wants to come west on a 1-year, $8 million contract, 100% sign me up instead of William Golston. I think you could also target a Malik Jackson, who, again, is older, maybe not really. Solomon Thomas, not really a scheme fit. He's more of a 4-3 guy. The interesting one here is Bilal Nichols. He's a very undersized defensive tackle, a little bit more of your gap shooter, quick 3 technique, 5 technique, from Chicago, has coaching connection. That could be something there. Maybe Jaron Reed could be something there too. But again, has mostly spent time in 4-3 as opposed to 3-4. So there are some options here, but I think number 1, I'm signing a younger nose tackle, whether that's Austin Johnson, Sebastian Joseph Day, or DJ Jones. That's where I'm starting to replace Linval Joseph. And then I'm adding a veteran, a legitimate veteran, to bring in competition for Justin Jones, for Jerry Tillery. And then I have a legitimate upgrade. If you draft a tackle, great. Chargers kind of kept 5. And, I know I probably value Braden Fehoko higher than most people do. But at that point, right, like, let's say they sign Sebastian Joseph Day, they bring back Justin Jones, they sign a William Golston, and then they have Braden Fehoko, Jerry Tillery on as kind of your backups. So that's your 5, right? You swap out Christian Covington for William Golston. You swap out Linval Joseph for Sebastian Joseph Day. And I feel like you have something there, significantly upgraded at least 2 spots. And then you have a rotation at least to keep people fresh. So I think that's a significant upgrade. That's a start. So like I said, I am going to do another video for the edge rushers and the linebackers. I kind of decided to put them together. I have not compiled the linebacker list, as you see below. But yeah, this is a fun exercise. I think you can kind of see where people are around this list. I didn't really talk about Hakeem Hicks. I'm worried about that age, that big red age tab. Also worried about the injuries, but again, coaching familiarity, scheme fit, sometimes there's something there. So would not be opposed, but that's not where I'm starting and spending my money. as you see, he's valued at 2 years, $8.5 million contract. So it's going to be fun, man. Really excited to see how this regime builds the defensive line out. I think that is going to be kind of overhauled. And I would not be surprised if we see 3 new starters among the interior defensive line. But I do think that Justin Jones is going to be back. Not super confident in it. So again, that's going to do it for me today. As always, please leave a comment, like the video, subscribe to the channel, and let me know if anyone stood out to you that I didn't really mention. If there's someone on here that you think the Chargers should absolutely sign, let me know. All for the comments. I'll be responding to them and hopefully having some good conversation. All right, guys, that's going to do it. Have a good weekend. Bolt up.